This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Nick Foles, you and the Philadelphia Eagles have just won the Super Bowl. What are you going to do next?
I'm going to Disney World.
Hey, what's up? Back at it here on Play-by-Playcast. My name is Joel Godet. Thanks as always for the subscribe, the stream, the download, however you're listening to this podcast. It is the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters, for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by, you guessed it, a play-by-play broadcaster. It's a professional development podcast diving into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, and preparations of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. Our guest today from the Detroit Pistons, he is the radio voice of the Detroit Pistons, Mark Champion. We'll get to Mark here in a second, but as you are listening to this, my voice is coming to you from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. My first trip to Brazil, cross another country off the list. I don't know how many that is. I don't know. America, Mexico, Canada, Israel, Brazil, Holland, England, France, Italy, Austria. I took a train through Belgium. That's 11. Did I say Italy? If I did, that's 12. If not, it's still 11. That's not a bad number. Passport's getting some action. CrossFit Games, doing the regional rounds today, tomorrow, and Sunday, if you're listening to this on time, in Latin America. It's the first time Latin America has had its own dedicated regional since 2014, and when I got in touch with CrossFit, and I was like, hey, I want to do some broadcasting, do you need people? And they were like, yeah, we might, and I was like, this would be cool, and I saw the dates they sent me initially for when they might have an opening, when they might have a spot that they need somebody for. And I was like, oh, I live in Indiana. There's a regional this weekend in Nashville. I was like, all right, that makes sense. They're going to send me to Nashville. I can do that. That's cool. I'll hop in my car. Great. And then I got an email that somebody might send you out of the country. And I was like, whoa, okay. This escalated quickly. First time I've had to apply for a work visa. Like, that was an interesting process. Not that complicated, but it was still interesting. So we'll see how this goes. CrossFit Regional. I'm working with a guy named Chase Ingram who's done this for a bunch of years for CrossFit. He is a much better CrossFitter than me. He's much larger and stronger, but we'll hopefully make a good pair and talk about some. They're not workouts. Workouts are what you do at home. Those are what you do on the day-to-day. We're going to broadcast some good events and some good tests of some of the fittest people on the planet. If you thought you were in shape, by the way, like, just look at the pictures of some of these people and then look at the amount of weight that they throw around, and they do handstand walks over obstacles. Like, that's going to be one of the events that I broadcast this weekend, is people walking on their hands up stairs and down a ramp. I can barely do that on my feet, let alone my hands. I can't even do a handstand, let alone move on my hands. So it'll be interesting. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to going to a different country, getting to explore Brazil. I have a day off in Brazil, too. My flight doesn't leave until 10 o'clock on Monday night to come back. I think I arrive back in the States at, like, noon, or back in Indianapolis at, like, noon on Tuesday. So I do miss Memorial Day, which kind of stinks because you get to grill out with friends and whatnot. But at the same time, I'm going to be in Brazil. So, hopefully I'll get to see some cool places and do some cool things. The actual event, the CrossFit Games Regional, is at the Olympic basketball venue. So that's pretty cool. And then on top of that, I'm kind of excited for what the atmosphere is going to be like. If you know anything about CrossFit, or if you don't, I'm about to tell you, there's the CrossFit Open every year. So the CrossFit Games has a couple of stages. There's the Open, which literally anybody can compete in. Like, you could sign up to compete in the next CrossFit Open next year. And then whoever's, like, really good in the Open goes to regionals, and then the top crust of the regionals goes to the CrossFit Games in Madison, Wisconsin. But the Open has 5 weeks, 5 workouts. There is one announced every Thursday night in a broadcast. CrossFit goes on location to various CrossFit gyms or boxes. They take 2 of the best CrossFitters in the world. They reveal the workout. Those 2 do the workout. They compete head-to-head, and then we have a couple of days as like Joe Schmo in our gyms at home to do the workout and submit our scores online. 18.1, so the first workout in 2018, the announcement for the Open was from Rio, and the place was bonkers. Like, it was insane to watch it on television or on the internet stream. So I'm really excited about how loud this place could potentially be this weekend. It might be one of the coolest venues that I get to broadcast in. We'll see. It's definitely going to be the largest audience I've ever broadcast to. And it'll be the first time I'll be able to actually look and see how many people have watched. Like, exactly. Like, YouTube and Facebook Watch and the CrossFit Games website will tell me. There's the little counter in the corner, like how many people are currently watching. So that's a little intimidating, but it should be fun. All right, enough about me. We'll talk about it more in depth next week, or when I get back and can tell you how things went or went wrong or went well. Mark Champion is our guest this week. He's the voice of the Detroit Pistons, and he's had a really long, distinguished career that started where I am right now. I work at Ball State University. He is an alum of Ball State University. Overlapped with David Letterman for what it's worth for a year. David Letterman was a senior. Mark was a freshman. We'll talk about that very briefly. It's not that exciting from when they were in college. He graduated Ball State. He went to Tampa, worked at WDAE in Tampa before it was the Sports Animal. I think it's the Sports Animal, right? Before it was the all-sports station it's known as today. Became the voice of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and got into play-by-play without starting in play-by-play. Like, he was at WDAE when it was, again, not sports. Like, he wasn't in Tampa to be a play-by-play guy right off the bat, and there he was in the NFL, and kind of the rest is history. Made his way up to Detroit, where he became the longtime voice of the Detroit Lions, and now the longtime voice of the Detroit Pistons. Really versatile guy, has worked for Westwood One, done the NCAA basketball tournament. He's done some golf for them. He's done the Olympics a handful of times. We'll talk about ice skating broadcasting. We'll talk about Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding in this podcast. So Mark has been there and done that with a lot of different things. And if you're saying to yourself, well, I wonder if I've ever heard Mark Champion. The answer is yes. Because Mark Champion is most known for something that you do not know he does. One of the most iconic sayings and commercials in American pop culture history. Mark Champion. Because at the end of every Super Bowl or other random big events, you will always see that commercial that says, "Hey, Ben Roethlisberger, you just won the Super Bowl. What are you going to do now?" "I'm going to Disney World." That voice is Mark Champion, which is incredible. Like, I never knew that, and it's a really cool story of how he got to do that and what it's like to be that voice still here today. So on a podcast about play-by-play, where else could we start? Let's talk about Disney World. Mark Champion, you're on Play-by-Playcast. What are you going to do now? Here he is, talking about the iconic Disney World commercial.
Well, that has a Ball State connection to it, as a matter of fact.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, a guy named Phil Lingell, who was a student at Ball State when I was there, I think he was maybe a grade or two ahead of me, was the marketing, one of the marketing guys at Disney. And I was in Tampa at the time doing the Buccaneers play-by-play, and he called over and asked me if I would be interested in voicing this particular commercial that they were going to do tied in with football. And I said, well, obviously yes. And so that's how it began. And that was back in, gosh, I don't know what it was, 84, 85. I know Phil Simms was the first one we did, so whatever year that was. And so that's where it started. And it's continued on. There was a 2-year lapse, but they brought it back this past season. And so it's been a staple in the NFL. They used to do it for the NBA, and they quit doing it. I think it was after Michael Jordan's final championship, and they've done it for a number of other things over the years. They did it for baseball a few times, not World Series, but they did it the year that Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire were battling in the home run race. They've done it for Miss America. They've done it for American Idol. They've done, so over the years they've done it for a number, but the staple is the NFL.
Is that kind of, it's going to be a weird question, but is it like one of the coolest feathers in your cap as a broadcaster, despite everything else you've done?
Yeah, it's I tell people it's the most famous 5 seconds in my in my career. And a lot of people didn't really know it was me, and I never made a point of saying anything about it. I think it didn't become known until I moved up here to Michigan, and I can't remember how the question came up. Or anyway, I think it was an interview I did with somebody. And so I just happened to mention it for some reason. I can't remember what it was, but so it's cool. I mean, it's in the American lexicon, and I'm the guy I've had people over the years ask me to record something for them for their phone answering service, and so I've done a couple of those, and I've had some local people want to do commercials with that same line, and of course I can't do that.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably
yeah, that's proprietary stuff. So, but it's fun. It's fun to know that you're part of a kind of an icon of commercials in this country.
You got to do it for weddings, though. Like, I feel like you can probably get like John and Christine. You just got married. What are you going to do next?
It's not a bad idea. Might branch off after my career is over.
Let's talk about that, the career. Let's go back. Let's go all the way to the beginning, if we can. You were born in Muncie, Indiana.
Right.
So I'm currently in your hometown as we record this. How did you get turned on to broadcasting? Who and what was your first foray into, I want to do this?
Well, just as a kid, I don't really have a moment. I was always a sports fan as a kid growing up, and used to listen to, I'm a lifelong Chicago Cubs fan, so I grew up listening to Chicago Cubs baseball, and they had some announcers who I really liked, and listened to Jack Buck and Ernie Harwell and some of those Hall of Fame announcers over the years, and of course the NFL games on TV. So just, I guess that just sort of interested me, and I started pursuing it without really knowing I was pursuing it. As a kid, I would come home and do play-by-play to these little tabletop baseball and football games they used to have, and I would just go up in my room and every day and do play-by-play and play the game at the same time. And there's a number of guys who have done that. I've seen some interviews where guys have said that they did the very same thing. And of course, your parents think you're odd if they're talking to yourself. But other than that, no, I think that sort of laid the groundwork. And then I just pursued it. Unfortunately, back in those days, back in the horse and buggy days, the high schools didn't have any broadcasting programs. A lot of them do now. But back then, I went to Muncie Southside, and they did not have any broadcast programs at all. So I didn't really have any professional training, until I got to Ball State in 1968, and pursued that. I worked at the Ball State station and spun the wax for the classical music, and but also worked at a small little FM station over in Winchester. And actually all 4 years I was at Ball State. And it was sort of a satellite for Ball State students. A guy, Dave Stout, who was one of the professors there, who I became very good friends with. He's passed away a number of years ago. But Dave and Darrell Weibel, who was a professor there as well, kind of headed up the department. And he passed away a couple of years ago. But those two guys were really instrumental in my career.
Well, the student radio station wasn't even wasn't even WCRD yet at that point.
No.
Dave wasn't Dave yet, so it couldn't be Cardinal Radio Dave.
Well, no, it was WBST, which I don't know if it's still there or not, to be honest with you. But Dave worked at the Dave Letterman worked at one that was not really connected to the department. He did his. It was kind of a I don't know, not really a pirate station, but one you could only hear in the dorms. It was a dorm radio station, I think, if I remember correctly. So, and he was a senior when I was a freshman at Ball State, so I sort of knew him, but I didn't hang around with him much because he was far ahead of me. But we'd see each other on a daily basis in and out of classes, but I didn't really. Of course, at that time, I mean, he was just another guy.
He was just Dave.
So,
yeah.
He was just Dave.
What was just Dave like back at that point?
Like I say, I really just passed him in the hallways. I mean, I never really even remember having any conversations with him. I may have, but I hung out with my guys, from my classes, and really because they worked at a radio station. I mean, I'd go to classes from 8 to 2 basically, and then work 4 to midnight at a radio station over in Winchester. Did that 5 or 6 days a week. So, I mean, I didn't really hang around the campus much. And I spent most of my time, honing my craft at a radio station. Did everything there, including paint the building.
Painted the building?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, you back in those days, and I still think kids should do this. A lot of kids come out of broadcast schools or universities, and they think they're ready for New York City and Los Angeles. And to me, I still think that they should hone their craft and wherever it might be, and in the Fort Waynes and Hartford cities, and wherever the small little radio stations are, television stations, and hone your craft, do everything. And not pigeonhole yourself, even if you're into sports, do everything. I did news. I was a disc jockey. I did, a little bit of everything. And I think it benefits you.
Well, if David Letterman was a senior when you were a freshman, that means Maury Manning was also already very well entrenched, though, as the voice of the Ball State Cardinals. For people that don't know Maury, he was here for 56 years as the voice of Ball State. So what was your exposure to Maury like back when you were a student, and how much did you get to know him and or work with him?
Well, I've known Maury, and then I got to know Maury as my career advanced a little bit. But I grew up listening to him on WLBC doing the high school basketball and football. He did it along with a guy who actually owned WLBC, Don. I've forgotten his last name. But anyway, he was a very, very good basketball play-by-play guy. And Maury was kind of his sidekick, and then took over and did a terrific job with the high schools and obviously with Ball State. So I got to know him a little bit better in my postgraduate days, after my career kind of started, and just, a great guy, a terrific man. And my best buddy in college, a guy named John Pelosa, was actually friendlier with Maury than I was. And John was a terrific play-by-play guy, but he just ended up going into the military, and ended up his career went a different direction. But he, at one time, had a chance for the Indiana Pacers job. This many years ago, but it just didn't work out, and he never did get into play-by-play. But he knew Maury very well, and I got to know Maury a little bit later in his career.
For people that don't, I feel like Maury's the kind of guy, like, if Maury was the voice of Notre Dame for 56 years, everybody would know who he is.
Right.
But is not a name that is on a national scale somebody that people recognize.
Correct.
Tell me more about Maury and kind of who he is to this area, and who he is to a guy like you growing up in this area, and then as you got to know him more once you got out of school, the kind of giant that Maury is for Indiana collegiate sports radio and high school radio.
Well, I think every city has a guy who is, I always tell young broadcasters about this, that, everybody wants to be in New York and wants to be on ESPN and wants, this type of thing. And that's great. And if you can do that, fine. But you could also, be a big fish in a small pond. And I think that's pretty much what Maury was. I mean, Maury was in the insurance industry, was very successful as an insurance salesman, and sort of, the broadcasting, I think at the time was more of a sideline for him than anything else, probably good for his business. And Don Burton was the guy he worked for. Don Burton, you can Google him or look up him in Muncie history. He was just a terrific play-by-play, old school play-by-play guy. And I can still hear his voice doing Muncie Central basketball. And Maury had a chance to learn from Don, who was the station owner, and just continued on, just loved doing it. And, you can, people got to know Maury either personally or just because he was Maury. And in a town like Muncie, in an area like that, you can become famous. And I don't think that's why he did it. I don't think he had that type of desire to be known that way. He just did it. He was an extremely nice man, and there are those type of guys in a lot of the cities who have decided to stay and do the high school basketball. We had a kid I went to school with, Steve McClure, who is doing that same sort of thing down in the Indianapolis area. Steve works on the Indianapolis Colts stat squad and for football games, but he also does a lot of high school broadcasts, and he loves it. He has no desire over the years to get onto a professional level or that sort of thing. He just loves doing the high school stuff, so there's nothing wrong with that.
What wound up carrying you, though? You wound up, when you graduated from Ball State, and I guess fill in the gaps for me here. What took you from Ball State to winding up down in the Tampa Bay area?
Well, I worked, before I went down there, I worked for about 3 months, I think it was, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, at a radio station. I was actually hired as a disc jockey out of when I graduated from Ball State, and the life of me, I can't remember how I found out about that job, but anyway, they hired me, and literally a week after they hired me, they changed the format and went to the old elevator music, the beautiful music, and I was pressing buttons and doing IDs at the top of the hour, and kind of stuck in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and then a buddy of mine who I met in Fort Wayne, he was also a disc jockey at that station, left for a job down in Tampa, and he called me and said, "Hey, they've got a news opening down here," and of course I was desperate to get out of Fort Wayne, and so I applied for that job, and they hired me. And I initially started out doing news at WDAE, which was I believe the first radio station in Florida. And traditional old middle of the road type music, and it was a great radio station, great news department, but there wasn't a whole lot of sports down there at that time. This is back in 1972.
How things changed.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot going on down there at that time. It was pretty much Florida State, and the University of Miami. That was about it. But so I just say I was there 17 years and just got to be, accepted down there and well known. And eventually I drifted over to sports when they brought in a North American Soccer League team. And then the Tampa Bay Bucks came in 1976. And of course, spring training was down there a lot anyway. And I got to know Ernie Harwell very well. And I stayed friends when I moved up here. And so that's sort of how I got into it. I didn't really do any play-by-play until I was hired by the Buccaneers. I actually, in 1978, auditioned for the job. There was an opening, but I did not get it. And what I did is I went to a preseason Buccaneer game, went up into an empty booth, and had a buddy of mine help me out and did a broadcast so I would have something to give them. And so that's how I ended up getting the job. I didn't get it in 78, but I got it the next year when they fired the guy who was doing it in 1978. And so I got it in 1979 and I was there for 10 years doing the Buccaneers before the Lions hired me in 1989 and was with them for 16 years. So, when I moved up here, that's really when my career sort of blossomed, if you will, and had opportunities to do a lot of things with CBS Radio, which would later become Westwood One. And so I did 3 different Winter Olympics, did a Ryder Cup. I did worked the Masters when Tiger won his first one in 1997. And so just, opportunities presented themselves and was blessed to be asked to do a lot of those things.
How do you get better at play-by-play? And what's your process of honing your craft when you find yourself thrust into the NFL and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and I guess in a lot of ways kind of learning on the fly that way?
Well, yeah, and it's a little unusual. I mean, my route to the professional play-by-play was a little different than a lot of guys. I mean, a lot of guys will do play-by-play of high school games and then some college and then eventually, work their way up. But, mine was a little bit different and very unusual. I don't know how many guys have just gone from college to the NFL. But you just do it.
You'd be surprised in this podcast, but we found a handful, I feel like.
Well, now I tell you what, I've taught a class up here at Oakland University off and on for a number of years. And I tell them, I said, with today's, there's so many platforms out there today that your opportunities are probably much better than they would have been 15, 20 years ago, where you had to go through get your tape together and send it out to radio and TV stations. But you just hone your craft. I mean, you just work on it. You do games and game after game, listen to your broadcast. And, I once in a while on YouTube, I'll hear a broadcast that I've done years ago, and I just sort of cringe. And so you just keep working at it, get better and better, and understand, what it is you need to do to be better at it. And never pass up an opportunity. I mean, I've done all sorts of broadcasts. I mean, auto racing and golf on radio, believe it or not, equestrian events. I was the figure skating guy for CBS Radio, and of course at the time I didn't know anything about figure skating. And so you just have an opportunity to do a lot of things, and don't pass them up because no, I only want to do baseball. Good luck with that. So it's the more you can do, the better off you are. But I think ultimately you just have to continue to work at it. Just keep doing it.
What were the lessons of those early years with the Bucs, though? Like, I mean, even if you look back at it now, what stands out at you about what you learned about this business, this craft, this art?
Well, I don't know. I think in my situation, I mean, I was well accepted, and everybody seemed to like my work. My bosses liked my work, and the team liked my work. And I think one of the key things is you develop relationships. You network yourself, and I had opportunities over the years, even down in Tampa. I was a finalist for the Chicago Bears job back in 1985. Of course, they ended up winning the Super Bowl, but I did not get that job. There were I had a call from the San Francisco 49ers. They were interested in me, and it just didn't work out. It was a long way to go at the time, and so just network yourself. You meet a lot of people, and it's the way it is now here with the Pistons. I've been heading into my 25th year with the Pistons, and every time we go to an arena, I know a coach or a player or somebody, front office person, you just sort of network yourself, and I think that's very valuable. I've gotten to know a lot of network people over the years, and I've worked with them. I do a thing with the National Football League, a broadcast boot camp, and where they bring in current and former players who want to get into broadcasting, and I'm one of the guys that helps out with that. Kenny Albert's there and James Brown. I'm one of them, and there's a couple other guys that help out on this thing. And so you get to meet a lot of people and get to know a lot of people, and it can be, helpful down the road.
Let me ask you about that a little bit. I feel like networking is such a dirty word, but from that standpoint, it's almost like a passive thing, if that makes sense. I mean, and is that really kind of the way to approach it? Is when you're in those situations, you just kind of meet people by osmosis, and then you wind up having kind of a pretty nice catalog of connections that you make just because you're making human connections.
Yeah, I don't recall that I ever met somebody just because I was looking to get a job. That hey, I want to meet so and so he can help me get this job. No, I don't think I ever did that. You just meet them and get to be friends with them, and somewhere down the road it can help you. You never know. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the phrase "never burn a bridge," and that's true. I mean, you in this business, you're going to get fired or laid off, or they're going to change the format, or they're going to do whatever it is. It just is what it is, and I was let go by the Lions after 16 years. For financial reasons, and I could have gone crazy there, but didn't. You just live with it and move on. And the same way, I had a situation down in Tampa where I had my salary cut by a third, and kept my cool and just went about my business. And the guy who did that to me, turns out he was one of three people who were responsible for getting me the job at the Lions. So you just never know. I mean, you never burn a bridge, no matter. I mean, there are times you really like to, but you just don't do that. And no, I think networking is terrific. I mean, you'd like to say, well, I got this job because I'm great. I'm just better than those other slogs that applied for it, but that's not the case. It's a very subjective business. One program director can think you're terrific. Another one doesn't like you at all. And it has nothing to do, you can't take it personally. You just can't. If you do, then you probably ought to get into some other line of work. But, you'd like to say, well, I got these jobs because of how great I am. And talent does have something to do with it, but a lot of times it is. I know this guy. I have a good relationship with this guy. I mean, that's how it was with me with the Lions. The head coach was a good friend of mine. Wayne Fonts was the head coach of the Detroit Lions. He was a good friend of mine. He was an assistant with the Buccaneers, and so that helped out. I had a good buddy of mine. He was the media relations director with the Lions. So I mean, those type of things are helpful. And while you could argue, well, that's not really fair. Well, that's part of it. It's just part of it.
What did you learn from athlete boot camp? Like, what's it like from a play-by-play guy's perspective, going through the learning process with guys that are on the athlete side of it, trying to do what they all think they can do, and probably a handful of them can?
Yeah, usually there are a few guys who are really pretty good, and there are a lot of guys working on ESPN, NFL Network, who I actually worked with over the years, and I get kind of a kick out of it to see them progress. And then there are other guys who get into it and find out that, whoa, this is just not for me. And my particular part of it was play-by-play. We would actually sit in front of a big flat screen TV and call a game. And I knew going in what the clips were and everything. So it wasn't about me. So, they wanted to make sure I knew exactly what was going on in the games and what the play-by-play was. And we wanted to make things as comfortable for the players we possibly could. And they found out, actually, they only found out like the day before. And then they had to get ready for the game. And so it was Dallas and Philadelphia or whatever it was. And so they would be given all the material. And, part of it was, okay, let's see what kind of preparation they use. Let's see if they fill out their spotting boards, or if they just come in with nothing. And some guys would. Some guys would actually spend a lot of time and actually fill out their spotting board. Some guys had no clue. and most of them, the biggest thing they said about the play-by-play was they didn't realize how fast the game moves. You're trying to say something and it's already into the next play. So that was the thing that they just didn't realize everything that goes into a broadcast. So that was I think the biggest thing you took out of it. And just because you've been a player or are a player in the NFL doesn't mean you can broadcast it. So
let me ask you some technical things about your side of it as well. And if I can jump to Detroit, I asked this question when we had Tim Roy on a couple of weeks ago with Golden State.
Oh, Tim's a great guy. Yeah, one of my friends.
Yeah, we talked about Steph Curry and what it's like to describe Steph Curry and do it justice when he does ridiculous things on a regular basis, and you have to make it sound like that. So when you're with Detroit and you're watching Barry Sanders, what is the challenge of being the radio guy, broadcasting a guy with that kind of talent, and making one run that is unbelievable sound unbelievable without being cliche of using words like unbelievable?
Well, it's it's very difficult. I told Barry that one time. I said, it's crazy trying to do the play-by-play for you, and because I mean, like you said, he'll make a run, and you go, well, that's the greatest run I've ever seen, and then the very next handoff, he tops it. So you just have to, and then you're going, man, how do I, express how good this guy is, and so you just do it. I mean, you do it in the flow of the game. I don't think you have any preconceived plans of, well, today I'm going to say this when Barry breaks off a run, that sort of thing. And you just go with, the crowd and how things are, the juncture of the game that he, some of his best runs were 3 yards. I mean, it was just, that's just kind of the way he was. And yeah, very, very difficult. NBA, I think that the thing, and I even hear this with some of my broadcast brothers, is that, the other team also makes exciting plays. So I think you have to be fair. And, if we're playing the Golden State Warriors and Steph Curry's draining threes all over the place, I mean, you got to be excited about that. I mean, he's a great player and those are great plays. And so that's something I've come to learn from when I first started out. I think I was very pro Buccaneer and maybe over the top. And you learn as you go along that, not every run, not every pass is the greatest pass in the history of the sport. And so you learn to kind of moderate that and figure it all out. And that's the case, with the NBA. I mean, there's so many great athletes. I mean, it's just incredible, the talent we get to see on a nightly basis. And, if the other team makes a great play, then I'm going to be, just as excited because it was a great play. How
do you find ways to describe new things? Is that, I mean, how much do you read? How much, how does all that factor into what? Well,
the big thing going on today is how do you work the analytics side of sports into your broadcast?
Sure.
And I think, to me, I think most of that stuff, while it's important to coaches and general managers, I don't think listeners care a hill of beans about, a person's war in baseball or whatever they are in basketball. It's first and foremost, most important thing you can do as a play-by-play guy is give the score. Because people are, especially on radio. I mean, I'm more of a radio guy. I've done TV, but radio people are tuning in and out. They're in their car, they're in their yard, or whatever. Hey, I wonder what the score is. You flip the radio on, and there's nothing worse than to have the radio on for 10 minutes and not hear what the score is. So that's one thing to any play-by-play guy is you cannot give the score enough. Ernie Harwell had a 30-second egg timer that he would use, and when the sand drained out, if he hadn't given the time, or the score, he would make sure that he did. And in basketball, I mean, I give it every made basket or every change of possession. Somehow I get the score in there because that's what people want to know. And then you paint the picture of whatever else is going on in the game. But if they tune in and they can't figure out what the heck the score is, then then you've lost them. So I don't get caught up in much of the analytics. I just don't. I don't think that I don't think our listeners care much for that, and I think it doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. It does to the coaches and the general managers. They figure out their rosters. But as far as the broadcast goes, I'm still kind of old school there, and I stick to the traditional stuff. Over the years, I've worked in a couple of things. A team is number one in the NBA in defensive rating, but I don't go into the details of it. I just sort of leave it at that because that indicates, well, they're pretty good on defense. So, but there's just too many numbers. I mean, baseball's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And football's kind of gotten that way, and basketball. There's a couple of my broadcast brothers who are really into the analytics, and you hear it in their broadcasts. And while they're terrific at what they do, I just think as a listener, you're going, what does all of that mean? What does that got to do? So I don't do much of it.
It's very easy, I imagine, especially in the NBA with how fast it is to over-describe too, that there's so much for listener to digest when they're listening. To you, what's the right amount of picture to paint in terms of being able to keep a good flow and keep it digestible for someone on the other end?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that's up to the individual, pretty much. I mean, that's my analogy to students is that you're an artist, you've got your canvas there, a blank canvas, and it's kind of up to you to fill in. Like I say, I'm a nuts and bolts guy. So to me, the score, the time, where's the ball? It's at the free throw line, it's at the baseline, it's at the, left sideline, right side, left, right. There's some guys who will say in football, for example, the ball's on the near side. Well, on radio, what does that mean? The near side and the far side. And I think in basketball, also in football, you can go, well, the Pistons are going left or right. Then, okay, in your mind's eye, now you can see where the ball's going. You can follow them left or right. So those types of things help to paint the picture, and then you can fill in the other stuff. Like you say, basketball, you got to be careful because it moves so fast. The worst thing you can do in basketball is look down at your notes because
Been there.
You look down. There's a made basket, and so you look down for whatever notes you're looking for, and then somebody steals the inbounds pass, and you missed it because your head was turned, or you're looking down. So you got to be very, very careful in basketball as to you got to keep your head on a swivel, so to speak. But I don't think there is any answer to how much information. There are guys who are very, very over the top descriptive, and then there are guys who are at the other end. And I suppose I'm somewhere in the middle. I try to paint the picture to where when the fans turn on the radio, they know exactly what's going on and where the ball is. I think that's the most important thing. Where is the ball? And so that then they can follow in their mind's eye and what is the score, and you can fill in with all the other stuff. Plus, in my case, I work with an analyst, Rick Mahorn, former Piston player, and so he's got to have some opportunities to get in there as well.
Do you keep your own score Because
I do, yeah.
Okay.
I keep my own running score.
Because that's where I always get caught when I look down. Because I'll mark off a bucket, I'll look up, and something just happened, and that's where I get beat by that.
Yeah, no, I keep my own running score, and I'm sort of, and I some guys do that, some guys don't. Some guys actually keep their own stats, which I don't do, but because in the NBA we've got a stat monitor right in front of us. I do use the stat guy at home. I don't on the road, only because of space. I'd rather have the space, and we have the stat monitor, and after every time out, they bring us updated stats, and and I keep a little note, the running score, and keep little notes here and there. And so and if you've done it as long as I have, you kind of recall things. But yeah, I do. I definitely keep the score. So, I think it helps you. I think it just puts things into your head. And when I prepare for a game, a lot of guys now use these stat services that actually prepare your spotting boards for you.
Yeah.
Well, I don't do that at all. I do it all by hand, and the colored pencils, and because I number one, I'm old school. I've done it that way, and I'm not going to change. And number two, I mean, I use the internet a lot. I mean, I download stuff. I do a lot of stuff off the internet. But when it comes to preparing my spotting boards, I do it myself, because it puts it into your head. You're writing down all this information, and it's gonna, you're gonna lock it into your memory, and you're gonna have much better recall than if you rely on some company to provide your notes for you every time. So I'm still kind of old school in that area.
How do you get your analyst in? What's the best way to do that in radio? Again, particularly when you're going so fast.
Well, it depends on the sport. I mean, baseball, good grief. I mean, I don't know how it was interesting. I mean, growing up, that's all I wanted to be, was a baseball announcer, because I grew up listening to Jack Quinlan, who was the voice of the Cubs, and Vince Lloyd, who took over when Jack was actually killed in a car crash, and then Ernie Harwell and Jack Buck and those guys. And I always wanted to be a baseball guy, and it just, the opportunity never came along. It came along in football and basketball, but football, there's time, because the way I would do it in football is, as long as I've got the mic back when they're breaking the huddle. That's kind of I worked with a guy with the Lions for all 16 years, a guy named Jim Brandstatter, who's actually still doing it. He's actually the play-by-play guy now for Michigan football, but he's the analyst for Lions football. And so I would always tell, when we first worked together, I would always tell him, I said, as soon as the play is over, I'm going to lay out. That's your opportunity, and whatever you've got, as long as I get it back before they break the huddle, so I have time to set the offense. And so that's generally my rule on. And of course, the no is never should the analyst jump you on a play-by-play call, on a long pass or a touchdown or whatever it might be. And I do hear it occasionally, where a guy will jump on top of the play-by-play guy, and it's just, that is, I would have a little chat with whoever did that, and tell them they better never ever do that again. And so those are things you work with when if you work with an analyst on a regular basis. You get a feel for him. And with Mahor in basketball, I mean, he's very good about it. He knows what the situation is. So he knows when there's if they're going to the free throw line, well, okay, there's his opportunity. There's some dead time coming out of timeouts. After a basket is made, a great pick and roll play or whatever it is, and he's got time. He knows as soon as I give the score. So Blake Griffin, it's a 15-foot jump shot, 2-0 Detroit. Bang, he's got an opportunity there. Yeah, it was a great play. It was set up by Babbitt, and then he gets out. So he's good about that. So it just has to, you get a flow going with the guy.
I want to ask you about golf, because I know you've mentioned that you've done a handful of other sports, and I think you even said figure skating back at the beginning. But I know you were a part of the broadcast for the 97 Masters. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
So can you just take me back to, first off, what it's like to be part of a golf radio broadcast? We haven't talked about that a lot on this podcast. But also, that was Tiger's first major. So what it was like to be a part of that phenomenon.
Yeah, his first Masters, I think he won it by, 12 shots or something. That's some crazy number. I think he beat, who was it? He beat Tom Kite in 90. You have to look it up. I can't remember now. But, well, golf's a little different. I mean, I had actually done a couple of golf tournaments locally down in Tampa. We did the seniors had an event that we did, and there was one other one. So I had actually had some experience with it. And then in 1994, because of the work I did in the Winter Olympics figure skating, that was the Nancy Kerrigan, Tanya Harding Olympics, and we hit a home run with that because radio, we were live, TV was on tape delay because it was in Norway, and so CBS, the CBS, I still have all the letters the brass sent me from CBS, thanking us and for what we did. We had something like 18 million listeners, and it was just nuts because of the Tanya Harding episode. And so that was, as a result of that, they asked me to come down to the Masters as kind of a gift more than anything else. And they're not really there to work, but I was able to stand around, kind of watch how they did the broadcasts. And so that helped out in 97 when Frank Murphy, who was running CBS Radio at the time, and is a dear friend of mine now, but he hired me to be part of their crew, and so they put me out on a number of different places. With radio, you don't have quite as big a staff, so I was out at A-Man Corner, and then I think I moved to 17 Green, which also allows you to cover 18T. And so, they would come to me on course, and you would describe something either live or on tape, and it's completely different from doing football, basketball. There's a lot of whispering going on. So it was, and while I'm a golf, I follow golf, and I when you're something like that, it's you respect the guys who are doing it today because they know so much more than I did. I just sort of tried not to embarrass myself because I didn't have the course knowledge and all of the knowledge that you would normally have if you did that on a regular basis. But I was able to fool them. So no, they appreciated the work I did. But it was something different, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. It was a lot of fun. I worked with Jim Gray, who is a well-known sideline guy and analyst. And I can't remember who our lead anchor was, to be honest with you. It's terrible. I can't remember who it was. But anyway, it was a lot of fun. And then that led to some other work. I did, like I said, I did the Ryder Cup here in Detroit at Oakland Hills. And that was Westwood One had at that time taken over CBS. So it was Westwood, and I did the long form broadcasts. So I was on for an hour or 2 hours with a couple of guys who were golf pros, and we had guys out on the course, and that was the Ryder Cup where the Europeans just stomped the heck out of the Americans. Hal Sutton was the U.S. captain, and but anyway, that was fun. I think I covered a PGA and a U.S. Open, so. But golf's a whole different animal. You got to really have knowledge. If you're going to do it right, you got to really have knowledge of the course. You got to know, the greens here run back to front, or you see it all the time on the telecast, how good those guys are. And, they know every little thing about golf, and that's the thing about that sport. I enjoyed it, but boy, there's a lot to know.
It was Tom Kite, by the way.
Yeah, I thought it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Kerrigan-Harding situation and being at the center of that. Because I have to imagine you knew that was going to be a big deal going into calling that event and that you'd have so many years on you.
Well, the interesting thing about that was that it all started here in Detroit at the U.S. Championship. The National Championships were here at Cobo Arena in Detroit, and that's where the incident happened. That's where Kerrigan's goons, the Harding's goons need Kerrigan, and that's where it all began. So that made it sort of, it gave me a little bit of extra stuff, because I was right here. I wasn't covering it, but I was here and reading about it and seeing it on TV and everything. So, but yeah, that was it was a circus. I mean, it was the ultimate in gang journalism. I mean, it was over the top. I mean, people following them around, and the one thing that was nice about it is that we were a rights holder. CBS Radio is a rights holder, so we're going to get access that Joe Blow from Dubuque is not going to get, and so that made my job a little bit easier. Plus, I was working with a guy named Paul Wiley, who was a silver medalist in men's figure skating, and he was very close friends with Nancy Kerrigan. So that helped out. And then, of course, they give you, we had all the jump sheets, so we knew exactly, what jump was coming. And if it didn't happen, then that obviously there was a mistake or, whatever it might have been. And but the whole atmosphere around there was it was a soap opera. It was just the ultimate in reality shows. You couldn't miss any practice because you were hoping maybe they'd run into each other out on the practice ice.
It's like the Kardashians.
Get into a fist fight, and of course the irony of it all was that neither one of them won the gold medal. Nancy I think won the silver, and Oksana Bayul, a Russian skater, won the gold. She was really, really good. And Tanya, I think, finished like 8th or some crazy thing. She had the boot incident, where she couldn't get her boot tied correctly and all this junk. And so it was, but it was fun. I mean, when I did the play-by-play, if you will, of it, I just stuck to. I mean, even though they gave us tapes and information on what a triple flip is versus a triple sow cow versus a triple, there's these, it all relates to where they take off and where they land. That's basically what it is. It's how, and of course, trying to describe that on radio. So I didn't even attempt. I just left all that stuff up to Paul Wiley, and he would say, well, she's, she doubled the triple here. I would just sort of set everything up and, here are the standings and well, it's a beautiful dress that Nancy has on, so, and just let Paul do all the technical stuff. And I just sort of described the atmosphere and, especially when Tanya was out there. I mean, it was incredible.
What do you do now? Like, how do you pass the time in the off season?
Get on my wife's nerves.
There you go.
Pretty much, yeah. No, this time of year, not a whole lot. I mean, I've got a few, commercial things I do, but this time of year, just sort of, I always keep track of what's going on. I mean, I watch just about every game in the playoffs, and I download all of the postseason notes from every team, so I'll have all that information heading into next year, and the rosters. I keep track of the rosters once free agency starts and rosters start changing. I like to keep track of who's where, and so when the season begins, you're not lost as to, okay, where's Gerald Green now? That's it. So I stay in touch, and with the Pistons, we got the draft is coming up. Although now we don't have a first round pick, but you've got the draft and free agency and all that sort of stuff. So it's kind of year round, but I don't overall I don't do a great deal this time of year.
Gotcha. If people want to follow you, how do they find you on Twitter, or how do they catch info on the Pistons?
What is my Twitter? What is it? What we call that Twitter handle? Is that their Twitter? I don't even know what they call it. It's at NBA Mark.
That's a good get.
And I'm on Facebook as well. I can't remember what the heck my Facebook thing is.
I figured some NBA fan named Mark would have scooped that one up a lot faster than.
Yeah,
that's ahead of the curve.
Somehow I got it. I'm on Facebook as well. I don't do a lot on Facebook. I mainly I'm on Facebook to keep track of my daughters, and they're posting pictures and family and all that kind of thing. But Twitter, I do quite a bit of little commentaries on Twitter, and it's I got to kind of watch it a little bit because I work for the team. I'm not. I'm not a radio station employee. I work for the team. So we're not allowed to, be overly critical about officiating, even though we'd like to. But I can't really, I'm not allowed to comment on. I've had a couple radio stations want to do stuff with me on the coaching situation. Of course, I can't do that either, and because I'm just again, I work for the team, so I can't. There's nothing really I can say. That's pretty much how you can find me.
All right, that's Mark Champion joining us here on Play-by-Playcast. The music's already playing because I'm out of time because I've got to go broadcast people lifting weight. Today, 333 and Linda. Those are the two things that I'm broadcasting today. We'll see how it goes. 333 for those at home. 49 minutes to row 3,000, do 300 double unders, so jump rope, and the rope has to go underneath twice, and then run on an assault runner, the self-powered treadmill, 3 miles. You got 49 minutes to do it. We shall see how I broadcast that. Fingers crossed. We'll talk to you about it next week. Back here on PXPcast. We're out.